A black man was spit on by a white cop in front of children, cameras, and silence. He didn't scream. He didn't fight back. He just stood there, humiliated. No one knew he was the new chief of police. Not yet. This isn't a movie. It happened in North Carolina. A system built to protect turned on the man meant to reform it. What came next shook an entire department and forced America to ask, what does real strength look like when no one believes you have any? Let's discuss what happened and why it remains relevant today. What happens when the man you just spat on turns out to be your boss? It's not a riddle. It's not a script. It happened. In North Carolina. On a summer day hot enough to melt more than just asphalt, maybe illusions too. Officer Davidson saw a man handing out food to the homeless, brown-skinned, calloused hands, quiet. He assumed, like he always did. And then he spat, in public, in front of children, in front of phones, in front of history. The man didn't flinch. He didn't raise his voice, because he knew something Davidson didn't, that he wasn't just another nobody on the street. He was the new chief of police. This story isn't just about justice. It's about how easily we judge and how painfully we learn. And if stories like this make you think, maybe even look inward, hit that like button, share it with someone who still believes in decency, and don't forget to subscribe for more real stories that reveal more than just facts. They didn't know his name. That's how it always starts. Just a man with a worn shirt and a calm voice, handing out hot meals beneath a sun that had long since scorched the sidewalk. He didn't carry a sign. No logo, no press, just trays of fried chicken, collard greens, and cornbread that tasted like home. The line stretched down the block. Children in worn shoes, veterans with quiet eyes, mothers with trembling hands. To the people in line, he wasn't a stranger. He was hope. But to Officer Davidson, he was a problem. You could feel the tension shift the second the patrol car rolled in. No lights, no siren, just authority sliding in like it didn't need to explain itself. Davidson stepped out like a man who had never been told no. Chest out, jaw tight, eyes scanning for something, or something, to put back in their place. And he found him. He didn't ask questions, didn't offer help. He just approached a man feeding the hungry and saw a threat. Saw someone too brown, too quiet, too unbothered by fear. Power doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it spits. And that's precisely what he did. Spit. Right in the face of the man holding a plate of food meant for a mother and child. Gasps echoed. Phones came out. The silence was deafening. Not because no one cared, but because everyone had seen this before. In different cities, different names, same story, same stain. But what made this moment different wasn't the spit. It was the stillness. The man didn't flinch, didn't curse, didn't swing. He stood there, eyes steady, as the spit slid down his cheek. He wiped it slowly, not with shame, but with a quiet dignity that made everyone else feel loud. Deep down, we all recognized that stillness. It reminded us of the fathers who bit their tongues to keep their jobs, the mothers who were accused but never believed, and the neighbors who swallowed injustice to keep breathing. This wasn't just a man. He was a mirror. And what he reflected was a question too big to ignore. What happens when the man you try to humiliate turns out to be the one who decides your future? Stay with me. You'll want to see what comes next. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. The spit hit him like it had a purpose, warm, deliberate, public. It wasn't an act of rage. It was a performance. Officer Davidson wanted an audience. He wanted the crowd to see a black man humiliated in the open air, to remember who held the leash and who was supposed to stay on it. But Juan didn't give him what he wanted. No raised fists, no shouting, no tears. He stood there, still as a monument, while the spit ran slowly down his cheek. Then he brushed it off with a hand that had likely wiped away far worse in life. You could hear a pin drop. The air was heavy, not just with humidity, but with history. Davidson grinned, pleased. The crowd shifted. Some recorded. Most just stared, because they knew they had seen this scene before, even if the names were different. It never ended well for the man on the receiving end. But today was different. Minutes later, back at the precinct, the same man Davidson cuffed like a trophy was walked through the front doors. Still silent, still calm. No resistance, no protest, just that same maddening stillness. Inside the station, radios crackled, phones rang. Officers passed glances, curious but uninterested. And then the door opened. A man in a tailored gray suit stepped in, tall, composed, skin the color of carved mahogany. His voice was measured, but unshakable. "Who brought this man in?" he asked. Davidson stepped forward, confident. "That guy?" Caught him handing out food. Started causing a scene. The suited man paused, looked Juan in the eyes, and then, without blinking, "Take off the cuffs, now." The room froze. Davidson blinked. "Excuse me?" "That man," the chief said, "is Juan Alvarez, your new commanding officer." Silence collapsed over the room like a thunderclap. Juan didn't gloat, didn't smirk. He just stood there, whole, dignified, unbent. And in that moment, everything shifted, not just power, but perspective. Because the man they spit on wasn't a symbol of weakness. He was a reminder. Real strength doesn't scream. It stands. And the system that thought it could break him, it just met the man sent to rebuild it. The silence didn't start on the sidewalk that day. It started decades earlier, in a kitchen Juan was too young to belong in, watching his mother wipe the same spot on a linoleum floor for the 5th time, just to avoid looking at the white woman accusing her of theft. Everyone in the room knew she didn't steal the bracelet, but she was poor and black. That meant her innocence had to beg for a room where accusation could walk freely. She didn't cry, not in front of Juan. She kept scrubbing, as if she cleaned hard enough to erase the shame pressed into the room's corners. Juan remembered her hands, raw, red, always moving. And he remembered his father, quiet in a way that wasn't natural, the quiet that only came from being called boy by a man half his size, twice his privilege. His father worked in steel, not for the paycheck. It was never enough, but for the pride, until that pride was stepped on by a foreman who didn't like how he stood up straight when spoken to. Juan watched both get smaller in public and larger in his heart. Not because they lost, but because they never stopped standing. In those moments, something hard and holy began to take shape within him. Not bitterness, not rage, but a kind of stillness that carried weight. A memory that refused to forget. A promise not yet made. He didn't dream of a badge. He dreamt of a world where people like his parents didn't have to choose between silence and survival, where dignity didn't need translation. And so he walked the long road. Military, then the community college, then the academy, then years of patrol, learning the streets, learning the system, not to master it, but to understand how to unmake it from within. By the time he stood there in the precinct, spit drying on his collar. He wasn't reacting. He was remembering. Every step, every scar, every name, no one bothered to clarify. He didn't want power. He wanted balance. And when they called him chief, it wasn't a title. It was the fulfillment of every time his mother bit her tongue. Every time his father swallowed pride like it was medicine. He wasn't there to wear a badge. He was there to make sure the next Juan wouldn't need to. Juan didn't walk into the department to punish people. He walked in to dismantle the rot they stopped seeing. His office was bare. No plaques, medals, or pictures of handshakes. Just a framed quote his father once scribbled on the back of a grocery receipt. "You don't fix a house by repainting the walls. You fix the foundation." And so he did. In his first week as chief, Juan quietly, without fanfare, suspended 3 officers for complaints that had been gathering dust in drawers. The department had a habit of forgetting, but Juan had not. He created a new division, civilian oversight, not run by insiders, but by people who had once been afraid to call the police, survivors, parents, former inmates, school teachers, and honest people. And when someone asked if that was too radical, Juan replied, "If justice feels radical to you, you haven't felt enough injustice." He didn't raise his voice. He raised standards. Independent panels reviewed body cams. De-escalation training became a requirement, not an option. Performance wasn't judged by arrests, but by trust. Promotions went to those who protected dignity, not just property. The old guard called him soft, said he was too idealistic, that he didn't understand how things work. But Juan did. He understood too well. That was the problem. He saw the culture for what it was, a fortress built to protect itself from accountability, and he wasn't interested in breaking in. He was there to take the doors off the hinges. He spent time on foot, not at podiums, but porches, listening, not to surveys, but to stories, from grandmothers who locked their windows at the sound of sirens, from teenagers who only saw uniforms in rearview mirrors. He didn't give speeches. He gave his number. And slowly, the station changed. Officers who once joked about complaints now checked themselves. Recruits started quoting his words. A shift began, not because they feared him, but because they respected the weight of his silence. Juan didn't arrive to be a hero. He came to leave the place better than he found it. He came to prove that justice doesn't need PR. It requires persistence. And when asked what the most challenging part of the job was, he didn't mention protests or politics. He said, making people believe this badge can still mean something. And people started to believe again for the first time in a long time. Juan never liked podiums. He said they made people speak to others instead of to them. That's why, when he returned to the police academy, this time not as a recruit but as the chief, he didn't stand behind a lectern. He sat in a circle, eye to eye, with cadets barely old enough to rent a car, but about to be handed a badge. No script, no PowerPoint, just a story. His story. He told them about a bracelet, a lie, a mother scrubbing floors while someone accused her with a smile. He told them about a steelworker father who lowered his gaze, not because he lacked pride, but because he refused to lose his job for demanding dignity. He told them about the day he was spit on, not for what he did, but for what he looked like. The room stayed silent, not the awkward kind, but the kind where hearts lean forward. Juan didn't lecture. He remembered, and through remembering, he taught. He spoke of the danger of unchecked power, of how racism doesn't always wear a hood. It sometimes wears a badge. Every decision they'd make in uniform would echo far beyond the moment, into kitchens, into funerals, into childhood memories someone would carry forever. He challenged them. Don't just be an officer. Be someone a child isn't afraid to run toward. Be the reason someone believes the law still has a soul. But he didn't just talk about injustice. He spoke of gratitude. He thanked the homeless man who had once given him a blanket while he was undercover on a cold December night. He thanked the old sergeant who pulled him aside in his first year and said, "Don't ever become what this job lets you get away with." And most of all, he thanked his parents, two people who never wore a badge but lived with more honor than most who did. Before he left, one young cadet stood up, voice shaking. "Sir, how do you stay kind when the system isn't?" Juan smiled, the way only someone who's seen too much can smile without breaking. "Because anger builds walls," he said. "But dignity builds doors." That day, no medals were handed out, no photos were taken. But something else happened. A room full of future officers didn't just learn how to enforce the law, they learned how to carry it with humility, memory, and grace. It started with a phone video, grainy, unsteady, but undeniable. You could see the moment, the spit, the silence. The man stood still, dignity dripping down his face, while laughter filled the background like static. It hit the internet like lightning. Within hours, the clip was on every screen. Local news, national outlets, and social media feeds flooded with comments, some angry, some ashamed, some stunned into silence. Because it wasn't just what happened, it was who it happened to. When people learned that the man being humiliated was the new chief of police, the conversation shifted. This is not because authority made him more human, but because the country had to admit that we don't recognize dignity unless it comes with a title. For many, it was the first time they'd seen a black man remain calm under humiliation and not be perceived as weak. They saw strength in stillness, fire in restraint. Churches brought it up in sermons. High schools showed it in ethics class. Talk show hosts debated it. And late-night comedians, for once, didn't joke. Instead, they asked, "How many times has this happened without a camera being present? How many people have we dismissed because they didn't wear a uniform or speak a certain way?" Protests didn't erupt. Something quieter did. A collective pause. A national intake of breath. People began to examine their police departments, the culture within them, and the silence they'd tolerated. Some officers resigned. Others apologized publicly. And Davidson? He tried to explain, but no one was interested in the details anymore. The moment was too loud for excuses. But Juan said nothing. No press tour, no op-eds. He just kept showing up. To community forums, to town halls, to schools. He sat in the back rows and front porches, listening more than speaking. He shook hands with people who once crossed the street to avoid him. And slowly, people started to believe that a uniform could mean something again. Not because it demanded respect, but because the man inside it had earned it. The video didn't make Juan a hero. It made America look at itself. And in that reflection, some saw shame. But others? They saw a standard worth reaching for. And for the first time in a long time, they looked up. Not at a screen, but towards something better. Davidson didn't hold a press conference. He didn't fight the termination. He packed a cardboard box under flickering lights and left through the side door. Like a man who finally understood that power doesn't protect you from the truth. There were no goodbyes. No one offered to walk him out. Even the officers who once laughed at his jokes avoided eye contact, like they didn't want to catch whatever had hollowed him out. The desk he once dominated sat empty, and in its place, a silence so loud it lingered long after he was gone. Juan never mentioned his name again, not in speeches, not in training, not even when asked directly, because Juan understood something deeper. Not every man must be punished out loud. Some just need to be forgotten. But what did remain, what grew in place of what had rotted, was worth remembering. It wasn't a plaque. It wasn't a statue. It was a ripple. A junior officer stepping between a colleague and a citizen, diffusing tension with a calm voice and a hand on the shoulder. A sergeant pulls a rookie aside to say, "We don't do it like that anymore." Fresh out of the academy, a recruit wrote Chief Alvarez inside his locker door, not as worship, but as a reminder. That dignity is quiet, but it echoes. Juan never stayed late for recognition. He stayed late because the system still needed mending. He read old case files like prayer books, made coffee for the janitors, and asked dispatchers about their families. He didn't lead from the top. He led from the side, from within, from below. And when he finally retired, without ceremony, without headlines, he left his badge on the desk, polished and simple, like the day he earned it. No speech, just a folded note beneath it. It read, "Don't forget who this is for." To this day, cadets still pass that note around. Officers repeat his phrases without knowing where they came from. And in every precinct where justice tries to mean something again, someone whispers his name like a quiet oath. Juan never wanted to be a symbol. He didn't want anyone else to grow up thinking silence was weakness. And in the end, he proved something many had forgotten. That authentic leadership doesn't shout. It leaves behind a better silence. What would you have done? Would you have raised your voice, your fists, your fury, if someone spat on you in public, with cameras rolling, your dignity under siege? Juan didn't. And maybe that's why we remember him. Because in a world that tells us to fight louder, he chose to stand still. He didn't react. He revealed. He held up a mirror to a broken system, and somehow he didn't break with it. He became the catalyst for others to begin healing. He didn't demand respect. He embodied it, and in doing so, he rewrote what power can look like when worn with grace. So ask yourself this: what kind of strength do you believe in? If this story moved you, even a little, don't let it end here. Please share it with someone who needs to believe again. Leave us a comment. What part stayed with you the most? And if you want more stories that linger long after the screen fades, subscribe to our channel and explore the moments that make us think deeper, feel more, and rise higher. Thank you for listening to our story. And until we meet again, may your voice be calm, your conscience loud, and your days full of quiet courage. Wishing you peace, clarity, and all good things ahead.